Hello, you're listening to the Bitches of Eastwick podcast. I am your host, Riot Adams, the youngest member of the Adams family. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that is either watching on YouTube or going to be listening on like Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This is definitely a work in progress for me. I listened to the last episode, the first episode of the podcast that I recorded, and I was just so not happy with it. I said like 14 billion times, and I was stumbling around my words. It's a little difficult to do the Peggy character for that long, so she's going to stay short form content for now. But it's a work in progress. Gotta stay positive. The cup is half full of liquor. Plus, doing this in my natural voice is just going to be a lot easier, a lot more relaxed, you know. So if you're just joining us, I am reviewing all of these spells from the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. So we're going to find out if a spell is real as it is on the show, as you see it on the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. We're going to find out if a spell can be adapted to make it work for some real witchcraft. And then obviously the telekinesis, the mutant powers, that's negated. It doesn't really count as witchcraft, so I'm not going to count any of that. So this episode of the podcast will have all of the spells from part 1 of the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, excluding the spells that we already discussed in the previous episode of this podcast. All right, let's get into it. Okay, for this first spell, I must have missed it in the last episode. And she's saying a rhyme, Hickory Pickery, Hickory Pickery, where shall this girl go? This definitely has to be some adaptation of like Hickory Dickory Dock and Eeny Meeny Miny Mo, Catch a Tiger by Its Toe, something like that. Yeah, it's basically a witchy version of Eeny Meeny Miny Mo, but in that case, you could just use Eeny Meeny Miny Mo. She's trying to find her way in the maze, and she's using that as a spell. So I wouldn't necessarily call that folk magic, but I do see that being adapted for some actual witchcraft. But also, dowsing rods could be a pretty similar thing there. But I'll give it a 5 out of 10 because it doesn't necessarily seem like witchcraft to me, but I get the context of it. What do you think? Sound off in the comments. Now, this next spell that she's using, she's in the woods. She has a branch. How do I explain it? It's broken into 3. It's like a branch with 3 other branches at the end of it, and she's got some white yarn, and she's wrapping it around those 3 branches to kind of make a little triangle shape at the end of the stick. And she says a rhyme and something about the 3 sisters, but she ends it with thrice to 9. I'm pretty sure that is an adaptation, or it's inspired by a witch's knot. A witch's knot is a type of knot magic that you can adapt to work for pretty much any kind of spell work. And you end it by tying 9 knots into a rope or some hemp twine, whatever you have. And this is the spell if you haven't heard it before. By knot of 1, the spell's begun. By knot of 2, it cometh true. By knot of 3, so mote it be. By knot of 4, this power I store. By knot of 5, the spell's alive. By knot of 6, this spell I fix. By knot of 7, events I'll leaven. By knot of 8, it will be fate. By knot of 9, what's done is mine. And basically you'll say that spell while you're tying each knot. So I definitely think the spell she's trying to do is a variation of the witch's knot, and she's using it to summon the weird sisters. But I could see that working pretty well if you were trying to summon a specific spirit, or maybe a familiar, something like that. Okay, the next spell is with Sabrina and the Weird Sisters, and they lure the footballers into the mines and trick them to make out with each other. Okay, here's my opinion on that. I think that you could definitely do a spell to cause two people to be infatuated with each other. However, they did no spell in the show. It was just movie magic, just fantasy. They didn't do anything. There were no candles, no potions, no oils, no nothing. So I'm gonna have to count that out and say it doesn't really hold up. I'd give it like a 3 out of 10. But this next spell here, Ambrose, Aunt Z, Aunt Hilda, and Sabrina are chanting to lock a demon into the house so that they cannot escape. And this is kind of like the last spell. There's nothing really to go off of. They spoke some Latin and formed a circle, but that was really it. So like cooperative magic, yeah, some points for that. Trapping an entity, yeah, okay, some points for that. But it wasn't really shaped in any form of actual witchcraft other than forming a circle and doing some cooperative magic. So I'm gonna give that one a 4 out of 10. Okay, this next spell is so good, y'all. Uh, people are sleeping on this spell. I love that cord cutting was sort of adapted into modern witchcraft, and was made pretty popular because of the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. And I wish a spell like this would also become popular. So Sabrina's trying to trap a demon. She's got some string woven through her fingers, and the spiders are spinning webs at the demon to trap it. And she's saying a few things in Latin, not really sure what's going on there. But the string that's woven through her fingers, I don't remember what this is called, but it's something that was done in like 90s, early 2000s, where you have the string wrapped through your fingers and it kind of looks like a spider web. But if you put your hand through it in the middle, the person can release the string and it just comes completely undone, even though you think that your hand would be trapped inside of it. I don't remember what that is called. But as far as witchcraft goes, this is definitely some form of not magic. I've been obsessed with it ever since I saw this done. I really like it. Definitely could use this as some sort of a trap. The way that it's done in the show isn't really the greatest, but you could definitely adapt this. Have the strings woven through your fingers while you have your own chant, your own spell, your own incantation that you're performing while creating this little web in your fingers. I really like it. As it is, I would give it a 7 out of 10, but a full 10 for creativity. Actually, let me say something before we move on to the next spell. So, the reason why I like this type of working so much. This is one of those practices where you could literally do anything with it. A good example would be candle magic. You can do almost any spell. Probably you can do every spell. Utilizing candle magic, and you could do the same thing with this not magic method. I really like not magic, and I feel like you could adapt this to work for everything, and to the point that you don't need candles, you don't need incense, no moon water, no crystals, nothing. All you need is some rope, a good spell, a good chant, and some mental fortitude. Okay, on to the next spell. So the next bit of witchcraft performed in this series is Astral Projection. So she's laying on the ground, she's surrounded by candles, and she astral projects herself into the room of Jesse Putman, I think was his name, Theo's uncle that gets possessed by one of the demons. Now, technically, I would not call this astral projection. It reminds me more of remote viewing. Astral projection would be going into the astral, which is considered a separate realm. And since she's still on the physical plane, that's why I would consider this remote viewing and not actually astral projection. Now, she does achieve this through what appears to be meditation, so that's correct. But sometimes people will employ different herbs or teas. A lot of time it's mugwort to help with astral projection. And also witches flight, the whole thing about witches flying. In my opinion, witches flight, that's actually the origin of astral projection. That's not to say that we created astral projection or the astral realm or anything like that, but but witches utilizing astral projection goes back to the rumors of witches flying. And if you want to learn a little more about that, I would pick up the book Folk Witchcraft or New World Witchery. Okay, this next spell is actually Exorcism. So, exorcism, I guess we could consider that Catholic, Christian, or let's just call it Abrahamic witchcraft. And what I love about this is that they've adapted it to take out any Catholicism, and they've adapted it to be a witch's version of exorcism. They're calling on their ancestors, dead witches in their bloodline. I really like it. I think it could be adapted pretty easily for breaking a curse, and also like expelling negativity or some really bad habits. I feel like the witch's exorcism could be utilized in that sort of way, not just like, oh, let's exorcise the demons. Because, not every witch actually believes in demons. And not every witch actually believes in gods, actually. I know a lot of witches that don't work with deities. They're not pagan, none of that. So all that being said, I would give the witch's exorcism, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. Oh, also, they throw blessing salts at the demon. Really like that. I'd give that a 10 out of 10, just for the blessing salts. And I think next Thanksgiving, I'm going to throw some salts on my relatives. Okay, so this next spell, they call it pulling the wool over their eyes, and they have some yarn, and they're forming a circle in the woods. They're basically making themselves invisible to Harvey and his family. Obviously, this wouldn't work because it defies the laws of physics. However, a cloaking spell could definitely be adapted out of this. I think there's a difference between being invisible and something going unnoticed. So there's definitely some potential in this spell. I'd give it a 6 out of 10. I would add, a chant, an incantation of something. It would depend on what you're trying to cloak, what you're trying to make go unnoticed. Okay, next spell is Sabrina chanting some Latin to protect Harvey in the mines. Now, that's pretty straightforward. Not sure what she's saying in Latin, but you could definitely adapt that. I mean, that's obviously some actual witchcraft. It's just a chant, So definitely some witchcraft there. It's a little bit basic, but I'll give it a 7 out of 10. All right, the next spell after that, she is casting on Harvey again, non-consensual, and she says, strength by day, strength by night, give him strength, give him might, and she's helping him to have some courage to speak at a funeral. That is pretty straightforward, and I think that the verbiage for that spell, pretty solid. I don't think you'd need to change it. It's a good chant. It's another basic one, but I'm going to give that an 8 out of 10 because the spell itself is pretty solid. This next spell, Sabrina has a poppet and some red twine, some red yarn, and she's saying something in Latin. She's in the woods again, and she's summoning Prudence again. So this is another summoning spell, utilizing yarn again, but this time she has a poppet. Here's what I don't like about this spell, though. It's a poppet, and if obviously you could have multiple ways to summon, but why the change up? Not really sure about that. Also, it was red yarn, so I just don't see the logic there as far as practical witchcraft goes. I'm not sure. There's just a lack of research on there. It was probably the producers being like, "Oh, let's change this. Let's do something else." So I don't like that one. Points for the poppet, points for the yarn and the knot magic, but to me it seemed more like a binding spell than a summoning. So I'm gonna give it a 5 out of 10. Okay, in this next spell we're doing some necromancy. Honestly, nothing about this spell correlates to necromancy. So the spell as it is, it's a 0 out of 10 for me. However, let's break it down a little bit. There's a pentagram made of salt on the ground. We've got the candles. We've got some blood magic. We've got some cooperative magic. I could see this being a very intense protection working, possibly a summoning, maybe some kind of spirit communication, which potentially I suppose you could classify it as necromancy, but they're trying to resurrect someone, which just that's just not the tea. That's not how it works. But the most it would correlate to necromancy is connecting with spirits and either summoning them, talking to them, something like that. But as it is, trying to resurrect someone, I don't like it. The next spell, she just says some Latin words and opens a portal to the other realm. Or no, it was Limbo. She's opening a portal to Limbo. It's a no for me. 0 out of 10 for sure. Nothing realistic about this, honestly. She's literally just in the woods speaking some Latin. The next spell, she is in Limbo and she's trying to cross over with the soul of Harvey's brother. Again, I'm gonna give it a 0 out of 10. I liked the verbiage. I liked the spell, but there was nothing realistic about it, honestly. So 0 out of 10 for that one as well. Okay, but this spell where they're summoning the winds, I love this. So they call on Boreas, Eurus, Notos, and Zephyros, and these are all Greek gods. And they also get the winds correct. So when she says, Boreas, north wind, I summon you, that's correct. There's a map on the kitchen counter with a bowl of water. I don't remember what this spell was actually for, but it does summon like a bit of a hurricane. And they each have jars, like mason jars, that they open up. And it's supposed to symbolize like they have the wind in the jar and they're releasing it. I love this spell. This would be such a great take on a weather spell. It would be different than other weather spells that I've seen before. I just really like it. Honestly, I'm giving it a 10 out of 10. Probably one of my favorites. All right, on to the next spell. So in this scene, Sabrina is summoning hellfire to burn the spirits of the Greendale 13 witches. I'm a little conflicted about this. I feel like there is some very real symbolism here that would involve burning a spiritual body or a spirit. And I feel like it's something that you would find in very obscure, very esoteric occultism. And so I'm conflicted. As it is, definitely not witchcraft. I don't know. There are some very obscure rituals the deeper you dive into occultism. So I could see an occultist creating a spell like this, a ritual, a ceremony, whatever. I could see somebody with a lot of knowledge creating something like this, but I don't know if I necessarily believe it myself. I do like the concept, but I have to give it a 5 out of 10. Oh, that's actually it. That is the last spell for part 1 of the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. So between that first episode and the rest of season 1 or part 1, there's a lot of real witchcraft in this series. I think that the witch or witches that wrote and created the spells and magic for this series definitely knew what they were doing. And I also think that they changed it. They changed all the spells just enough so that they weren't quite real on their own, but they could be adapted to be actual witchcraft. Except for the folk magic. There's been a few folk magic spells that I was just like, oh, well, that's just witchcraft. There's nothing fantasy about it. It's just witchcraft. Well, that concludes the second episode of this podcast. We have officially covered the first season or part 1 of the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, breaking down the spells, finding out which ones are real, which ones are fantasy, which ones can be tweaked just a little bit to make them real witchcraft. And for the next episode, we will be starting season 2 or part 2 of the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Thank you for tuning into the Bitches of Eastwick podcast. Hopefully we will have some guests on soon, and stay tuned for the next episode. If you're listening to this on YouTube or wherever you are, subscribe, like, comment, share, whatever. I don't know. Do the things and the stuffs and the other things. Do those. All right. Thank you for listening to the Bitches of Eastwick podcast, and I will see you in the next episode.